You're listening to the 411 Forecast Wrestling Podcast on the one and only 411 Podcast Network.
That's right, you are listening to the 411 Foresight Wrestling Podcast on the 411 Podcast Network. Thanks to the Resonant Complex for that super cool opening. Be sure to check out their debut album, North Ave, on all your favorite streaming sites. All right, today's podcast, we have top 5 championship matches in wrestling history. I asked a bunch of people on Twitter and everybody for your favorite match. So I'm going to quick run through these here. We got Lightball Man with another bright idea. He says Edge's first Money in the Bank cash-in. Here's Revolution, always a great choice there. Ashwin says Punk vs. Cena, Money in the Bank 2011, pure classic. It absolutely was. I had goosebumps from beginning to end. Dylan says the Dolph Ziggler cash-in the night after WrestleMania 29. Obviously a great moment and what people call the loudest ovation of all time. So be sure to YouTube that one. Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 12. That's the Iron Man victory over Bret Hart that everybody knows. Mr. Coop says Chris Jericho beating The Rock and Stone Cold in the same night. Vengeance 2001. That's when he became the undisputed champion, which obviously is historic for its own reasons. Grievance Committee says Mankind over The Rock for his first WWE title. I will touch on that one later. Aaron says Warrior beats Hogan at WrestleMania 6. I was 11 years old and had never seen Hogan lose clean before. That is big because that is very true. Hogan had never lost for years. So to see him lose to the Ultimate Warrior was both a shock and very, very big news for the future of wrestling. Chris says a lot of those also. Warrior over Hogan, Mankind over Rock, Goldberg over Hogan for the WCW title. Daniel Bryan, WrestleMania 30. I will touch on that later. DIY over the Revival for the NXT Tag Team titles. A classic right there. Bayley and Sasha for the NXT Women's title at TakeOver Brooklyn and TakeOver Respect. Probably the greatest women's match of all time as they are ready to main event WrestleMania in a few weeks for the first time ever. Mike Fergus just shows a picture of CM Punk holding the WWE title. Again, the match against Cena, 2011, maybe one of the greatest matches I've ever seen and definitely match of the year for 2011. Simon says Austin Rock WrestleMania 17 set the biggest buy rate record in the United States, 2001. We all know about that. Jericho vs. Triple H on Raw, which technically never happened because it was reversed. Rock vs. Triple H, Backlash 2000. Again, huge crowd response there. Bulldog versus Brett, Wembley, SummerSlam 1992. Pete says, as a huge Macho fan when I was younger, the WrestleMania 4 tournament felt enormous. Yes, it did. The big title match for Macho Man. WWE Trivia Generator says watching Roman Reigns win his first title took a while, but he got there. He eventually did get there, and he is now the top star. Cena defending against Shawn Michaels. I'm assuming WrestleMania 23's main event. Great match there. Shawn Michaels, again, WrestleMania 12, winning the Iron Man match. Lex Luger beating Hogan after nearly a year reign. That was obviously a Nitro in WCW. Goldberg besting Hogan, which we mentioned. Austin beating Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14 to start the Austin era. The list goes on. That's what he says. And yes, the list does go on. So, rambling aside, let me introduce to you first Mr. Matty Moses. How's it going?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me again for one of these lists. You know, I love it. It's kind of cool to go back and relive some of it and dive back into the matches and just even confirming for myself that they were title matches. You know, so much time has passed, and you know, I kind of chuckled to myself when you mentioned, you know, from any era, and really I only have, you know, a couple decades in there, you know, basically from Attitude Era up to early 2000s, just, you know, that I'm familiar with. So that's kind of where I'm just going to be stuck for this
All
segment.
Right.
But I figure you want to dish it over.
Yeah, dish it over to our third competitor. Introduce yourself.
My name is Noah Watry. I'm Justin's brother. And like Matt said, who does have great music, by the way, you should really check him out.
Thanks.
Yeah, like Matt said, my experience is a little bit limited, going to be really narrowed down here. But I feel like it's going to be very detailed and probably include some matches and some wrestling moments you guys may have forgotten about. And most likely is what you grew up on and living kind of in the moment. So just to rehash those moments for you guys.
Okay, we got top 5 championship matches. So Noah, do you want to kick it off for us?
I'm going to kick it off, and I guarantee no one will talk about this match. It's not going to be on anyone's radar, but it is going to probably be among the most recent matches, and actually will be it's going to include the last pay-per-view I watched, and that would be WrestleMania 34. I know I'm going to butcher the last name here, but Charlotte Flair versus Asuka.
Yes.
That was a good one, sure.
That one, to me, number one, I had not seen a WrestleMania in almost a decade. So thanks to Justin for we all kind of hung out and watched the match. And, I didn't really know too much of any build-up to any matches, any title defenses, what have you. But watching that match, it stole the show. That was the match of the pay-per-view to me. Obviously, Triple H and Angle and Stephanie and Rousey, that one was kind of cool and everything. But the point and the whole theme here is title matches. And Charlotte Flair, number one, not that necessarily it was a women's match, but the fact that they finally showcased women who wrestled.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put that, too, yeah.
We knew women could wrestle. We knew Lita could wrestle. We knew Trish Stratus, Tori, Sable, the Sable Bomb. Like, they could do all these moves. They could do this. Chyna.
Right.
I mean, rest in peace, Chyna, but they could do this, but they were just never showcased. And when they were, it would be like the next week, like, oh, they're in a bra and panties match. They have to strip down. They have to wear these sexy outfits. And not that they don't now, because obviously they do, but for them to steal the show and for me to look back on that match after not watching for almost a decade and to say, this match stole the show, it's still what I think of, and you go to Noah and say, what do you remember about WrestleMania 34? I say Charlotte Flair, Asuka, and to me that one stole the show. So I feel like that one should get a nod, and I guess that's what I have to say about that one right now. Let me just check back. I did leave some notes here. Yeah, I feel like women finally got their due with it, and well-deserved, and...
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of a neat turnaround, especially when you pick up from watching it, from having not watched it, like you mentioned, a decade later, to kind of see where the women's where it's at right now. So it seems like it's in a pretty healthy spot. Mine. Oh, Justin, did you want to harp on that? You want to touch on that a little bit, or
just a little bit? I think that's a good choice. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it is a good choice because they haven't been called divas in years. They're superstars now. They're just like the men. Right. They haven't been called bra and panties or diva matches. They haven't had those. So it is a nice welcome, and I'm sure Matt will remember this or not. But our podcast about a year and a half ago.
Give the guy some credit. Come on.
About a year and a half ago.
I don't remember that.
He asked me about all this, and
there goes credibility.
It was basically that the women are now superstars, and last year that stole the show. And the other match, which was match of the night, was obviously with Ronda Rousey. And all year the women main evented. They were last on Raw. They were last on SmackDown. They main evented pay-per-views. There was an all-women's pay-per-view that sold out in New York. And this year, WrestleMania, MetLife Stadium, 80,000. The main event for the first time ever is going to be women. And that's a good match because now it shows you of the different era. So it's a good, movement forward. So that's my thoughts on it. Matt, what is your number 5?
My number 5?
Wait. Sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but I just want to reiterate, like Justin said, it was something new and fresh and that finally showcasing. And my list will kind of show that a little bit, somewhat. But the fact that they were finally being showcased, and I did lose my train of thought here. Okay, never mind. Matt, go on.
It's all good.
Never mind. Sorry.
No, that's good. Mine was Triple H versus Cactus Jack, Royal Rumble, 2000, and just for like the sheer brutalness of it, and I don't know, it seemed like it was a good mix. Just between just how brutal it was. And two guys, like Mick Foley getting that chance, and I don't know. I think they put on a good match.
They might have bled to death if they would have let them.
Yeah,
I remember that one. Very well.
That's a good choice. The historic background for it is Stone Cold, who I guess was for story was run over by a car 2 months earlier, but we'll forget about that. He was out.
The usual, no.
He was out. He was out with a neck injury, and The Undertaker had also disappeared in 1999 for surgery, and he would return a few months later at Judgment Day 2000. But, the company at this time obviously was, battling WCW. It was the dying days of WCW, but the backstory to this was nobody trusted anybody to quote-unquote draw at the top of the card. Undertaker was out. He had been there for a decade, and Stone Cold was obviously the man. They didn't have anybody. Triple H in 1999 pretty much had to be put on top, and Mankind had actually walked into Vince's office in November 1999 and told him he was retiring. And Vince looked at him and said, "You just had your last match." And it ended up changing because Stone Cold and all that went out, because the thing about it was, Stone Cold was leaving, and Foley was kind of like, I can't lead the team now. I can't, retire. So basically Vince told him, get in the best shape of your life, and we're going to do a story with you and Triple H. And obviously then he had the title, and the lead up was to WrestleMania, and it was to basically prove that, other guys can draw on top. And Royal Rumble 2000 ended up doing, I believe at the time, a top 5 buy rate of all time. And the following month, Inside the Cell, Cactus Jack was, he was going to retire. That was the plan. But obviously he came back, but he was going to retire. And that also did a huge buy rate, which led them into WrestleMania. And then Stone Cold came back, and then everything was kind of back to where it was. But, it just proved that other guys could draw, and Triple H and Mankind from that point forward were pretty much trusted as main eventers. And, it obviously worked out well for the company.
No, that's definitely a great point. No, it's good background to have too. That's really interesting. And what's not to like about Mick Foley? So an easy guy to get behind too. So that's a really good point.
I think Mick Foley, definitely represents the everyman. We all love to wear sweatpants. I mean, shoot, you come home from a hard day at work, first thing you do is you get in your sweatpants.
Exactly. It's either sweatpants or no pants. All right, so my number 5.
Let's hear it.
Here we go.
Here we go. Let's set the stage for you. 93,000 fans, Pontiac Silverdome, 1987, WrestleMania 3. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yep, I know it.
Oh, yeah.
If you're thinking Hogan, Andre, you are wrong.
What?
It is not Hogan, Andre.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
This is my number 5 match, and it is the only one that is not for the WWE World Championship. I am talking about the Intercontinental Championship match. Ricky Steamboat over Macho Man. Now, you may say, what the heck are you talking about?
What the heck are you talking about?
Exactly.
What the heck are you talking about?
So let me just tell you how WrestleMania at this point had gone. WrestleMania 3, the first match went 5 minutes. The next match went 7 minutes. The next match went 3 minutes. The next match went 4 minutes. The next match went 4 minutes. The next match went 6 minutes. The next match went 8 minutes. The next match went 3 minutes.
We've all taken jumps longer than that.
Exactly. So in WrestleMania history, and the whole point of quote-unquote wrestling wasn't wrestling. It was two guys locking up. It was maybe a move, a slam, something, and then the crowd would cheer, boo, whatever, and then it was over. To me, Ricky Steamboat Macho Man, which ended up going about 15 minutes, that was the introduction to wrestling. Similar to Film Study, where they showed The Shining and Citizen Kane, where you can actually now go back and break down each little point. You can go behind the scenes with the director. They can show you why they did what they did, how they did what they did.
Sure.
Ricky Steamboat Macho Man, they did the hip tosses. They did the arm drags. They went to the top rope. And to me, that introduced the first time where people actually looked at it, maybe like theatrics of, wow, these guys are actually athletic. They're not just two big 300-pound guys that run into each other and pin each other.
Right, not just these huge bodybuilders at the time.
Who knows, and who knows what the future could have beheld from that. So, okay, that's a really good one.
Wow.
That's a good one. And it's similar to the Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon ladder match from WrestleMania 10, where it was pretty much like the introduction where you knew more was to come, and it was wrestling before wrestling. When you see now, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, all these guys now. So that's where that.
Let's just steal our whole list here.
Well, no, something in its purest form like that, though, I think makes it timeless, right? And you could say that about some matches, and it might not be true, but to what you're saying, Justin, where looking at that, the originality behind it, or you mentioning that ladder match, what's more to come, it just makes it that much better. You can appreciate it that much more looking back at it for people, breaking ground like that.
And I will say, based on Justin's point and my point, that's what I was going to say before I rudely interrupted Matt on his number 5. My list is going to be based on that. It's going to be about the innovators, giving people their due, where you guys may not remember where something may have happened, but it still sticks out to me.
Oh, sure.
Right? I literally had to check back only on if they were title matches or not.
Right.
But these are what sticks out to me. So
right.
That's what my list will be kind of based on. And now I'm kind of more interested in Justin's because based on where he went with number 5. So we'll see.
That's a good one. Do you want to take us into number 4, Noah?
Oh, okay. Number 4, lead right into it. Again, guarantee no one thinks of this, but it's what sticks out to me. A little backstory on this one is going to be 3 wrestlers that no one may mention, but again, I feel like they have to get their due, and they wrestled their asses off. They were technical. They were entertaining. So it's going to involve Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and the man we will not necessarily mention, but maybe the best technical wrestler of all time. But my number 4 match is going to be when Kurt Angle first won the Intercontinental belt while also holding the European belt.
Sure.
And this was going to be at No Way Out 2000. I did have to look up the date, but he defeated Chris Jericho for that. So he held 2 belts, European and Intercontinental belt. And that kind of set the stage that Kurt Angle's here to stay. He's new on the scene, but him, Jericho, the other man, and they just kind of had a feud that literally lasted years and years. And they did things technically. They did things on the mic. They did things that they could have stolen pay-per-views, honestly.
Right.
But it still sticks out in my mind, just the moves they did. When they performed, they were never the headliners up until later in their careers when they were actually competing for the title belts. But those low belts, such as European, Intercontinental, and that's what sticks out to me. So Kurt Angle, when he won the Intercontinental belt while also holding European belt.
I'm cool.
My number 4.
That's a good pick. I like the idea behind it because it also showed 2 other things. One is WrestleMania 2000 when that triple threat match happened, and Kurt Angle ended up losing both without being pinned, which was kind of funny. But
I ended up rewatching that one because of this list. Yep.
But it was the year WrestleMania 2000. Little stat was the European, Intercontinental, and Tag Team titles match all had people debuting. And it was also a point of, they were turning a new leaf. Edge and Christian, Dudley's, Hardy's, the 3 guys you mentioned, 2 of them had left WCW. And it was pretty much like, okay, it's clearly their company now, and it's over. They have all the young talent and the top stars. So that's a good pick.
Yeah, and do you remember, Justin, when we got that pay-per-view and we were watching it in the living room? I think Mom actually paid for it, but she came home late, whether she was working or whatever it was. I mean, obviously she always did that for us to enjoy things, but remember coming home and being like, what are you watching? Oh, what's going on in it? And we were like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. I think that was the first pay-per-view we actually purchased and got. So
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, Mom, we just blew $100 on pay-per-view.
Yeah. Oh, Hardy's.
Yeah. The triangle ladder match. So that's a good match. That was a good night.
Oh man. Yeah, Matt? That I'll never forget. So, all right. On to you, Moses.
Mine is and we were talking about this a little bit before the show started, but Raven with the hardcore title and with the 24/7 rule, which was early 2001 is when that started. And I just liked it for the innovation behind having that hardcore title and having it up 24/7, just, up at any time, I think led for just a lot of creativity and seeing the way, Hardcore Holly and all those different guys, how they reacted with it. How many times it changed hands. I believe the match, it was Raven versus Taz. If you're going to look up the clip, it was I believe it was in February 2001, but yeah, that was just the one that came to mind. I just like the idea of it, of the hardcore and just anything goes.
I agree.
All right. I think it's I wouldn't have that anywhere near my list, but I will say that I will.
You're a piece of crap, bud.
But I will say that I would say influenced us a lot.
What a shiny piece of crap.
I would say because, most of our matches we ended up having were hardcore, and that was the stuff that, like you said, innovative, and we kind of took from it. And I think that's what added to almost like us more than anything.
That's a really good point too, because I remember all the different matches that we try and have. Yeah, you have to be creative instead of just slamming each other into the grass, right? So it's like,
exactly,
and stuff like that probably spawned the having the title hanging from the basketball hoop. Like just those those different ideas, or like what can you get away with using as a weapon, right? Like the foam bat that's like not foam but kind of foam, or like the McDonald's boxes, or am I allowed to say McDonald's? Things like that. So
mug match.
Oh my gosh, mug match. But that's a great point to make, Justin, and I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I mean, and then even the whole thing of bringing weapons down to the ring with you, like we'd always carry that, whatever it's called, the pail or the
pail. Oh my gosh, yes. Come on, it wasn't Mr. Greeny.
Gangrel.
No, which one of your personas was it? Like was it
Crazy Case?
Yes, Crazy Case.
Crazy Case. I don't know.
Because Raven would have that shopping cart full of all the different.
Yeah, and I'd bring out the bucket.
The bucket. That's so cool. That's fun.
Yeah, I just want to say, Matt. Yeah, that was definitely one I was thinking of for an honorable mention. Just because, like you said, what it represented. A hardcore title was constantly on the line 24/7. When you're watching the shows, they would randomly cut to something happening backstage. Guys were randomly fighting, and it kind of kept you on edge where, maybe you don't disappear during a commercial break. Maybe you have to keep watching literally 24/7. That kind of glues you to the whole show. There used to be matches, okay, you can disappear, but suddenly, hardcore titles on the line 24/7. That's something I was going to mention later. It's something that was on my mind as well, but that it's at any point, anytime, any weapon, anything you can, like you guys said, use that in our backyard wrestling as well. We took it to a whole different level. Basketball hoop. We used cars. We used a propane tank. Like anything we could literally find to wrestle off of, we would use. So that definitely kind of spawned some ideas, and I think that one definitely deserves a mention. So really good choice.
It fits into the Attitude Era where you couldn't turn the channel, and thanks to that, nobody did turn the channel. So, Mr. Matty Moses, you want to tell everyone where you could see some of those NRW matches?
Yeah, if you look up YouTube and search for Mr. Matty Moses, and I've got him on there. It's so funny having these podcasts together. Just makes us want to have an NRW match, have a return or something like that.
Oh, boy.
It does, and that's, again, Mr. Matty Moses, so Matty Moses, Mr. Matty Moses.
Perfect, thanks, man.
Just for people who may not understand. But
no, good
just
one.
Getting it out there for you, because I watched a little bit today, so yeah.
I appreciate it.
That's a good segue into my number 4, which was a triple threat match. This is the most recent match on my list. 2014, WrestleMania 30, New Orleans. It was Daniel Bryan versus Randy Orton versus Batista for the WWE World Championship. Quick backstory, Daniel Bryan had pretty much been in the middle of the card for months, for years, everything. But in 2012/2013, he kind of caught fire with the whole yes chance. And it kind of got going. John Cena handpicked him, specifically handpicked him to wrestle at SummerSlam the previous year, and he ended up losing clean. So for John Cena to lose clean like that was obviously a major endorsement from him. And then Daniel Bryan kind of got screwed around a little bit with a heel turn, and everything kind of, went haywire. But come WrestleMania time, the fans would not stop chanting yes. And in late 2013, there's a famous clip where basically for 5 minutes, there's an in-ring promo with Triple H, and the crowd just keeps chanting for Daniel Bryan, who had nothing to do with anything going on. And at first he stopped, then he kind of looked around, and then it just kept going, and it wouldn't stop, so much so that the Randy Orton versus Batista main event of WrestleMania, and remember, Batista had just returned, and this was his big Guardians of the Galaxy kind of tie-in. He was the big star returning. Fans wanted Daniel Bryan to beat Randy Orton for the title, not Batista. It was just bad timing on Batista's part. So much so that the Randy Orton-Batista main event of WrestleMania got changed Daniel Bryan was added to the match, and it was not supposed to be that way for a while. He got added to it. The fever pitch of the crowd, it was so big. In the opener, he had to beat Triple H to be added to that match. That was an added stipulation. He beat him clean. And then that night, defeated the rest of Evolution. He beat Randy Orton and Batista, won the world title. Clearly, the crowd went nuts in New Orleans. 75,000 fans chanting, yes, yes, yes. It was the great story. It was a huge payoff. The next night was one of their highest-rated shows in years, and I believe they've only gotten near that rating once or twice since that day in 2014. But the real reason behind it all is because when people think of wrestling, they think of big, 250, 300-pound men. Daniel Bryan's like 5'6", 5'8", 200 pounds. You could argue Rey Mysterio and everything else.
Holy
it's the
shit,
same
I
way.
wouldn't have thought that.
It's the same way where Ric Flair is actually not that big. Heck, people think Randy Savage is pretty big. He's really not.
Ric Flair is like a little troll.
Yes, just to show you that Daniel Bryan and others, it's not about size. It's not even about anything like that. It's about much more. It's about the passion. It's about the in-ring skills. It's about the presentation. It's about the entrance. It's about everything, and especially the fans. It's all about the fans. It always has been. It always will be, because at the end of the day, they're the ones in the arena. They're the ones spending the money. They're the one buying the pay-per-views, subscribing to the network, all these things. And at that point, it was something to be proven that the fans were not going to take no for an answer. Daniel Bryan was going to be added to that match, and they weren't going to accept anything else. And it happened. They listened. It was a great moment. Huge payoff. Main event.
So Daniel Bryan was a little bit after my time where I didn't really watch, but I do know of the yes chant. Is that kind of the same message that people would send, yes, 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 this is happening, yes, this is a thing?
Yeah, it was basically Daniel Bryan. Every time he'd win a match, this was during his little heel run, he would over-exaggerate. He'd win a count out over some bum, and he'd get out of the ring and go, yes, yeah, and act like he just won the Super Bowl. But then it caught on, and instead of the yes, he ended up having the yes lock as his finisher, but it ended up taking on a life of its own and meaning so much more. They called it the yes movement, and then they also called it Yeselmania.
Wow.
Okay, that's funny.
Nice.
But, yeah, again, if we go back on that with Batista, so was that near the end of his time? Did he come back for that? Because I remember Batista with Evolution, and all of a sudden he was huge with the Batista bomb, and he kind of resonated almost like the modern day Warrior, where he'd rip on the ropes and you'd get behind him and you get amped up, and then this is it, this is happening.
Yeah, Batista, he had his obviously run. He debuted in 2002, did the whole Evolution thing, was world champ in 2005, did that whole thing. He left in 2010, and he left because of a few different reasons, which I guess don't really matter now in hindsight. But after 4 years, yes, he returned in 2014, won the Rumble, and he was supposedly going to be the big star that was going to set records at WrestleMania, the Guardians of the Galaxy tie-in. He was going to have the belt. He's going to have the belt at the opening and all the red carpets. And like I said, fans, no offense to Batista, but they weren't going to take it. They were getting Daniel Bryan in that match. So Batista ended up, he lost. And Daniel Bryan got the world title, and then Batista ended up leaving only a few months later. So he was back in 2014 for, I believe, 6 months, and then he left, and now he's back again. So he came back for 6 months and then left, and now he's back after 5 years.
All right. So, great for that. I used to love Batista, loved Evolution, loved Triple H. But again, this was more of a case than the fans were kind of giving you and showing you what they wanted, and Vince kind of, followed and listened to that?
Yeah, he eventually got the message. But again, WrestleMania of all shows is planned out, months in advance, sometimes a year.
Right.
Orton was going to hold the title.
They definitely set their storylines up for that, yeah.
Yeah, he was going to be the heel champ and cheating and screwing everyone out of the way. And then here comes Batista after 4 years, the conquering hero returning, the big movie star, win the Rumble. And again, I think people have appreciated Batista's 6-month run in hindsight. But at the time, it was just, we love you, Batista, but we want Daniel Bryan. So
unless you're The Rock or Stone Cold, that probably doesn't work.
Right, and there's
I say that as a guy. I used to love Batista, but honestly, it'd be like, really, you couldn't do maybe better. You couldn't think of something different for WrestleMania, the show of all shows,
Yeah, on paper, it sounds great. Batista, the big movie star, the top guy, returning after 4 years to beat the heel champ, and then he goes on red carpets and talk shows, and he's the champ. So it sounds great, but again, the yes movement wasn't slowing down. So, Matt, you got anything to add before Noah's number 3?
No, go for it.
All
right, number 3 on my list. I've seen it, I think, a couple times. You may be surprised it's not higher, but Backlash 2000, Rock versus Triple H. Many reasons here, but number 1, actually not number 1. I'm just going to read a couple of them here. First of all, Triple H, Justin alluded to this earlier. Triple H kind of ran the show. Like, he literally carried the company. Stone Cold was out. He was their biggest draw. Triple H was like a newly crowned champ and like finally taking that top heel turn, drawing. The Rock kept battling him. They went through Mick Foley where he didn't conquer him. He didn't get through. So it's like, okay, he's done. The Rock keeps trying. Now Triple H keeps defeating him. Stone Cold's out. And then I think it was Linda McMahon dropping the bomb of Stone Cold coming back, or Stone Cold will be there, or return, or something she said.
Yep.
And I remember the whole pay-per-view, it's like that's all they talked about was Stone Cold. Stone Cold, is he going to be there? And it almost took away from every other match. But at the same time, like, you bought that. You were there to watch it. You cared about that main event. And it was Triple H versus The Rock. I mean, at its apex, like battling back and forth. And after all these months of Triple H's reign, all of a sudden Stone Cold comes out. You hear the music. Honestly, the biggest crowd reaction I can remember, and back then crowd reactions were the best. Everyone was off their seats. Everyone had their hands in the air. There were signs just flying left and right. I mean, if that doesn't give you goosebumps when you go back and YouTube it, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry, but
yeah.
But anyway, Stone Cold comes out, knocks Triple H out. I believe it was a chair shot, the whole Patterson, Briscoe, all that nonsense. But anyway, and all of a sudden Rock hits Triple H, spine buster, sets up for the people's elbow. I'm getting pumped up just talking about it. And you just watch it, full motion, throwing the elbow pad in, left to right, does it. Earl Hebner, 1, 2, 3, and The Rock finally does it. He finally defeats Triple H after 4, 5, 6 months of the Triple H nonsense. And I say, as a guy who loved Triple H, loved him, but at the same time, as the majority of fans, they wanted to see The Rock. But everything built up to that one match, and it finally happened. He finally won the title. And to me, just rewatching it, I'll never, ever forget that moment of the spine buster, people's elbow, the crowd reaction, JR going nuts, Lawler going nuts. To me, that just stands out. And those last few moments, to me, just totally delivered on the match. It totally delivered. So I'll never forget those. So that is my number 3, actually.
Very good pick.
That's a good one. I went.
I feel like that should be number 1 the way I talked about that.
Yeah.
I'm sweating. Mine was I went with the Dudley Boys versus the Hardy Boys. This is October 25th of 2001, and it is when they won the WCW tag team titles from the Hardy Boys. And I picked this one, I believe it was on a SmackDown, and it just stands out to me because I believe that they're the first tag team to hold all 3 titles. So they had won. They had been tag team champs in ECW, WWF at the time, and then WCW titles.
Yeah,
so
certainly ECW, WWF, WWE / whatever. But yeah, okay.
So I wanted to pick that one. You know, of all the amazing matches they've had, I wanted to pick that one just because as it stood out. Maybe the significance of it, or like historical value of it.
Really, really good one.
I like it.
Thank
It's interesting because, you know, that storyline, the whole invasion, gets a bad rap, and people rip on it and say it's one of the worst storylines of all time. But I always like to point out that Invasion 2001 in July, I believe it was in Cleveland, had the single, and to this day, the single biggest non-WrestleMania buy rate of all time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
much as want to rip on it, and like you said, Dudley's and all these guys were switching sides and all this, even though we knew that obviously one man owned them all.
Right.
It was very cool. I loved it, of who would jump, who would do what, everything. And like you said, WCW champion. I mean, Rock, what, like WCW champion, like what? That makes no sense, but it was great.
Well, great. It was kind of great seeing like this. The WCW, the world like heavyweight title for them, just seems so much bigger than the WWF one at the time. It was just so much bigger. So you're seeing this like, whoa, wow, that's really cool. Or how they kind of incorporated it, where people were holding both titles, things like that. What they did with it, and it's interesting to see where they are now. Where just with having the different brands between Raw and SmackDown. So is that like almost a way of keeping that that mindset that's still somewhat competitive, but you're competing against yourself to keep it sharp.
I don't watch now or anything, but I know it's differentiated Raw, SmackDown. But like Matt said, back then, suddenly you're mixing every wrestling entity. We knew there was ECW and Sandman, he'd chug beers and throw guys through tables, and Spike Dudley was literally just a rag doll. We got that. WCW, they tried, a bunch of old geezers that couldn't keep up to par anymore.
Well,
I'm just making fun, but anyway, there were 3 different wrestling entities, and all of a sudden we couldn't have all 3 combined.
Yeah,
but we got all 3 combined, and for less than a year, we got to see what happened when you mixed. Suddenly, maybe certain guys couldn't keep up to par. Some guys became stars, and you're like, okay, this guy's a keeper. This guy, he can't really wrestle with us. RVD became a huge hit. He was always a huge hit with ECW, and all of a sudden you put him with I remember the hardcore title, like, okay, big hit. But like Matt said, the significance behind it, and I like that because that's kind of what my list entails. But again, that's one I wouldn't have thought of. But again, I'm not going to, think off the top of my head here, but
sure, I
probably would bet that Dudleys are the only ones to have every, tag title in all 3 wrestling factions. So great choice there.
Thank you.
Yeah, it goes back to my last the last podcast we did about the Dudleys and all their historic title wins. I will quick mention Buff Bagwell was one who lasted a week before he was literally kicked out the door on TV, which was not because he was fired about a day later.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that one too, because like it's easy to just remember that part of it, right? Like Buff Bagwell, but Noah, to like what you were saying is the other guys, Booker T. Like look at guys that have excelled that we got from WCW, so
right. and
you
Booker
can't just
T,
shine a light on Buff Bagwell.
The bookend.
Yeah, and I always gave Booker T. I always gave him credit because he took less money to go to WWF once WCW folded. He had a guaranteed contract to sit on his couch for a year for millions, but he wasn't going to do that. He wanted to do what he loved, and he wanted to prove he could do it on the big stage, and he did, and more than made it. Now he's in the Hall of Fame 2-time.
Okay. You know what, then? I honestly did not know that. So guess what? My respect rating for him just skyrocketed because here I thought, okay, he's doing the bookend, rip off of the rock bottom, the spinneroonie. I mean, I used to do it in backyard wrestling, like as a joke, like just like the worm, like okay, but really, what does that do? But that's something I didn't know, and that kind of shows where when Vince bought out the competition, like you want to be a part of this, you want to be in. Show it, prove it, and honestly, now knowing that about Booker T, he fucking worked his ass off, and probably a lot of us laughed at him then and made fun of him. But guess what? He actually made a second career of himself for that. So kudos to him, and good for Matt again with the Dudley Boys. Like they fucking stood the test of time, and tag teams, they're easily among the best, without a doubt.
Oh sure. Thanks, man.
I would say if we never get anything out of that entire storyline and rip on it all we want. As long as we got the Survivor Series 2001 epic promo from Puddle of Mud, everything was
the best ever.
Yeah, I agree.
Just YouTube Survivor Series 2001 promo.
Right now.
Google it, YouTube it.
Yeah.
If you're still using Yahoo it.
Yeah,
it'll lead you to Google. It'll lead you to YouTube.
We're just gonna stop the podcast. And so
no matter what you do, though, do not MySpace it. All right, so I'm going to move on here and go to my number 3.
Keep it moving.
But before I go to my number 3, I will remind you all that you are listening to the 411 Foresight Wrestling Podcast on the 411 Podcast Network. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, TuneIn, YouTube, and please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. My number 3 is actually the only one on my list that happened on a Monday Night Raw. It was a Monday, January 4th, 1999. Backstory for you. At the time, in the mid-90s, Vince McMahon had been pretty much distracted by a trial from the federal government, which he eventually ended up beating, by the way, and being acquitted of. But he was a little distracted, and this is where WCW was taken over by Eric Bischoff. They ended up signing everybody imaginable, from Hulk Hogan to Scott Hall to Kevin Nash. They had Sting, they had Luger, they had Ric Flair, they had everybody you can imagine. They were all on WCW. And, the WWF was losing money. They were losing tens of millions of dollars. They were recording in, the lowest low of arenas you can imagine. They weren't drawing anything. It was bad for a while. So eventually, it got so bad that they pretty much had to screw Bret Hart to leaving the company and not paying him his $20 million. It got pretty bad there for a while.
Oh my gosh, $20 million it was?
It was a lifetime 20-year, $20 million. So technically $1
That's
million.
it? Oh.
Either way, they couldn't afford to pay anybody anything. And when WCW came calling with, hey, we got Ted Turner's billions of dollars, what would you do?
Yeah.
So
fuck it, I'm gone.
So in late December, Raw, which, yes, used to be recorded, folks, again, cost-cutting measure there. It used to be recorded at the end of December 1998. The Rock was champ, and he defended against Mankind. So this would air January 4th. And Mankind won the title. So that was recorded. The people in the crowd knew, obviously, and the taping results, internet wasn't, too much back then, so word hadn't necessarily spread. But Mankind was technically the champion, but it wouldn't air until the following Monday. They recorded on a Tuesday, I believe. So they eventually got to that show, and at this point, Nitro, which had been defeating Raw 83 weeks in a row in the ratings, they were literally beating them, and it got pretty dangerously close there for bad news for Vince. But Mankind and The Rock was the main event for the night. And something Eric Bischoff always liked to do on Nitro was anytime Raw was taped, he would literally open the show on Nitro, which was always live. Again, they had infinite amount of money. They would always open live and tell you what would happen on Raw and then tell you to put down your remote because they're live and you don't know what's going to happen. So during the show, Tony Schiavone, from a directive backstage from Eric Bischoff, was told to pretty much dump all over Mankind and The Rock as the main event for the title. So the famous phrase Tony Schiavone made up was, we understand Mankind, who wrestled here as Cactus Jack years ago, is going to win their world title. And then he goes, that'll put butts in the seats. And then he goes, ugh. And then they went to commercial. And again, it was pretty much something he had always done, except this time, Bischoff didn't know it, but he pretty much just killed his company because at that very moment, 500,000 viewers flipped over to Monday Night Raw, and they watched Mankind for the first time in his career win the title and have the emotional celebration with Michael Cole and everyone in tears talking about how the everyday man finally did it, and he celebrated. And that night, here's the point of the story. That night, WWF won the ratings, and from that point forward, Nitro never won again. It was what you call a massive, massive mistake by Bischoff. And 2 years later, from a $40 million, $200 million revenue company, Nitro beating Raw 83 weeks in a row, selling out stadiums. Yes, stadiums, not arenas, selling out stadiums. 2 years later, Vince bought them for a few $1 million.
Wow.
Okay.
That's some Art of War shit right there.
Right. All is love and war. And Bischoff, he did that every week, so it wasn't anything new. But that time, 500,000 flipped over, and they never turned back.
Wow.
I like that on a bunch of different levels. Number one, that your list is kind of gearing what I thought mine would be towards is, a little different, and it's great because we're getting a little history lesson and hearing more about it and backstory, which are things maybe not everyone knows. So that is great in that regard. And number two, I do remember that match. And I also remember WCW. I remember it was right before we kind of watched, but kind of flipping through channels sometimes with friends, and there'd be two different wrestling channels. We would just skip through them because we didn't watch back then, but it's funny to look back now how much was literally at stake. And, Bischoff kind of sealing his own grave there. And Vince, you think of now what they're worth and what they do, and it's like I hate to use the term literal, but they literally own wrestling.
Right.
So, who knows if he didn't do that? Like, what would have happened? They would have just beat WWF back then, now WWE, but do you think it really would have happened?
It wouldn't have. I mean, it would have eventually turned, I think, because Bischoff and the whole company, there's more of a backstory to it, but it's just historic that they never did win again, and their streak was pretty much over, and everybody knew the run was over. And obviously, like you say, or what I said, 2 years later, it was the beginning of the end, as they say.
Yeah, and that's so funny how, like, that was it. Like, that was just it. They never won again. That's funny.
Never won again.
Okay.
Is your number 2?
All right. So this one kind of leads me to my number 2. Not only is it number 2 on my list, but number 2 at a WrestleMania. And a WrestleMania 17.
Uh-oh.
WrestleMania 2001. Check out.
Dig it.
Anyway, WrestleMania 17, 2001. My number 2 on my top 5 list. The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. I figured everyone's getting there to it, but I'm going to hit it at number 2. Number 1, the hype. Hype alone, to me, you got to have a build-up. You need to have a build-up to a match. You got to have a backstory. You got to have the hype to it. You got to have the promo. You have to have people actually caring about the previous pay-per-view. Whether it's what was it? It's like, okay, it goes from Royal Rumble to No Way Out to WrestleMania. That's when you start to care. The beginning of the year, the road to WrestleMania. And that kind of led up to The Rock versus Stone Cold to me. That's when I watched at its apex. That's when I cared the most. The match itself, awesome. The Rock, to me, he takes the stunner, and it's like the best of both worlds, or worst if you think about it. He takes it the best, but it's also the most funniest way he takes it. It's the most ridiculous way.
Yeah.
But it's also the way no one else can repeat it, and it's like the Rock's own way. It's the Stone Cold Stunner. It's the Rock Bottom. It's the People's Elbow. Moves that are synonymous with wrestling. It's Vince McMahon getting involved. And that's actually why number 2 is where it lands, is because of the ending. Vince turns and when Stone Cold says by any means necessary, he or whatever he said to lead up to it, like he's willing to do whatever it takes to get that title. And then all of a sudden Vince joins with Stone Cold, but then he just beats him with a chair. And then that's how he wins. To me, it was like a 9.5, 9 out of the 10. Like, man, you're right there. You could have done it. But then, like, it just ends with like 20 chair whippings and chair beatings. And then I think this is when The Rock left for The Mummy or Mummy Returns.
Yep.
For his character in that movie. Okay. Yeah. And so just like everything was there, and it was right there. And it's just the little bit of the ending wise, it doesn't reach number 1 for me. But again, Justin, I'll just never forget watching those and the build up to it. And we probably watched it a million times on a VHS tape. So what does that tell you? Like, if you're willing to watch on a VHS tape, like that's got to stand out to you, and that I'll never forget. So that's why it's number 2 on my list.
No, that's a really good one.
Matt, you got anything to add quick?
No, that was. I mean, just all the memories of watching that stuff. It's actually great. My 4th one is.
Oh, come on.
Oh, you go, Justin.
I got a backstory to this.
we definitely need backstories, but
let's hear it.
We don't want this to drag too long.
Let's hear it.
All right, so like I mentioned, somebody on Twitter, I believe 2 people had this as their number 1. It's actually not on my list at all, but the thing about it was at the time, it's been beat, but it's actually the highest grossing pay-per-view in the United States from the company of all time. Obviously, things have changed now, and records are broken, and
sure.
A million WrestleMania has done better. But at the time, it was U.S. only. Now it's worldwide. So The time for U.S., it was a record, million pay-per-view buys. It's a big deal to hit that number worldwide, but they did it United States only. So that's how big of interest it was. And it was obviously huge. And, not to put a damper on it, but Stone Cold does often say that's his biggest career mistake of his, entire life is doing the heel turn. He thought his character needed freshening up. He noticed how the landscape had changed since returning from his neck surgery. And, he suggested turning heel and doing completely something different than, middle fingers, beer, swilling, and, cheers.
Sure.
And he did it. And he said, as he was in the ring, he knew it was a huge mistake, and he should have given Vince a stunner and called an audible on the spot. But he didn't, because obviously, that's what they had agreed to. And some people remember this, but months later, they actually started the face turn of him back when he came back and saved Team WWF on a Raw leading into Invasion when Vince wanted the old Stone Cold back.
Sure.
But it was actually a setup because then he stayed heel and then joined the Alliance. Vince and everyone again tried to talk him out of it, but Stone Cold wanted to try the heel turn.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, everyone calls this the end of the Attitude Era. Fittingly, Vince and Stone Cold shaking hands because they pretty much saved the company in the late 90s. So it was fitting that it was those two on the biggest stage of them all. And the sad part is you can legitimately go and look at ratings and everything from the next night on, everything went down. So that's why Stone Cold does say the heel turn shouldn't have happened. It was a terrible decision. As memorable as it was, hindsight will remember it as probably not for a good reason.
Yeah, and again, just a quick touch on that. I didn't mind necessarily the Vince Stone Cold, but it's like it wasn't believable. And then the fact that it was this repeated chair, using the chair. It's like, this is WrestleMania.
Yeah.
This is Super Bowl. And you're just going to whip a guy with a chair, and then that's how you win it. And
Exactly. And then weeks later, they beat up, then he joined Triple H, his biggest rival. It was like, wait, what? They just destroyed each other for months. He hired Rikishi to run him over.
And then there was no story to it. There's no point to it, there's no build up to it. There's no.
Well, that's a great point, Noah. Too, like what you're saying, it's build up, right? It's not even just about the story, but it's build up and to get emotionally involved in it, other than just okay, this is what works. That's what
wrestling's based on, is the stories, the build up. That's why we care.
Yeah, you just have a TLC match every night. If it wasn't about that,
exactly, we wouldn't care. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you nailed it.
Build up and make it special.
Absolutely nailed it, and that's why it was number 2 and not number 1 to me. But you guys both nailed it.
Well, I think that's a great way to break it down.
All right, what's your number 2?
Mine was Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 19. I believe this is 2003.
I remember it.
Oh man, my 2 little bullet points are just obviously him, Lesnar, almost destroying his neck with that
the shooting star press.
Yeah. Yes. But that he goes on to finish the match and gives Kurt Angle the multiple F5s. He didn't get him with the one, and just him whipping him around Kurt Angle took it like a champ. That was a really good match. That's one that sticks out, and I was happy to see it was a title match as I went back and looked at it and watched the match. So, I tried, this list is kind of in chronological order, 2000, 2001, 2003, but as you build up, so you can kind of see that sweet spot from when we were watching, like you were kind of mentioning, too, for that era. But for me, for what has a place in my heart, so.
Yeah, you mentioned the shooting star. There's a good backstage documentary about the whole match, and he ended up only getting a concussion somehow out of that. That's kind of a miracle in itself.
To him.
But the part about it was he was an amateur wrestler, and if you know amateur wrestling, the one thing you always do is neck bridges. So he had a strong neck, and that pretty much is what saved him. So it's kind of ironic after years of doing that. And going into the match, Kurt Angle was actually they pretty much pulled him from the match, and there was going to be Brock Lesnar versus vacant title. Kurt Angle needed neck surgery, and he was not going to make it to Mania. until I believe he called Vince and pretty much begged him to keep him in the match. And Vince and him, I think the story is Vince or somebody started crying, and he basically said, "I love you." And it was, him putting trust in him that Kurt Angle could make it through one more match, because he ended up getting surgery and was out for months immediately after that. Could he get through one more match and be safe with a 295-pound newcomer, Brock Lesnar, who's
right,
clearly nuts? And then, of course, as fate goes, it was Brock Lesnar who was pretty much knocked out in the match. And Angle, as safe as I guess you can be after a match, made it out in one piece.
Suplex City. Oh,
right.
Yeah, and the thing for me on that was like, it's a shame because Lesnar can hit the move. Like, he can do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I didn't get was like, okay, you knock the guy down. Like, guys, we've seen in matches where they just drag him over to the center of the ring, maybe a little closer to where they can hit it. Like, what was so bad about him doing that?
I think that was the biggest thing. Like, when I look at it, the
it's
angle you
totally
get,
ego and like,
yeah, I think it was just
bad,
too far.
But at the same time, like, dude, like, your limits. You can't jump 20 feet, and he can do it. Lesnar can do it. I don't like Lesnar. He's awesome in being a heel and powerful, and his moves. F5 is one of the greatest finishers, honestly, I've seen. But the thing is, he could do that move, and it's like, why didn't you just drag Angle over? Why didn't you do something that could have landed him, or Angle hurting and move? Like, they BS so many moves, and it's like that one spot, that one move.
Yeah,
to me, that would have been perfect. But
I don't want to defend the guy, right? But I think that just because it's WrestleMania, I think he's what's this one thing that can put it over, or. But like I agree with what you're saying too. The ego gets in the way.
And the sad thing is, that's what I think of with that match.
Yeah,
that's honestly what I think. Amazing match, like totally amazing. Great guys, great wrestlers. But when you say Noah, Angle, Lesnar, WrestleMania, what do you think of? Oh, Lesnar couldn't hit it. Broke his neck.
Broke his neck.
I mean, I don't know how.
Delete.
I try that. I do
now.
that. Like, I'm sorry. I'm fed in a tube. Like,
no, that's good.
That's what I think of, and that's a shame because they put on a hell of a match.
Yeah.
It's a good pick. I think it's almost like they made up for it, because that following year at SummerSlam, when Kurt Angle was back and healthy and everything, they probably had a better match. And then even on TV, they did the first ever Iron Man match on SmackDown, and then they had probably an even better match. So they more than made up for it. And you made a good point. I mean, Brock has hit the move a million times in training. There's videos, but he had never hit it on TV. So the idea was WrestleMania, he's going to bust out this huge move. It'd be like if Braun Strowman went to the top, and did like a moonsault.
Right.
It'd be like the most amazing. It's called a WrestleMania moment. So he'd hit it a million times in training, OVW, all these things. And then he got to the top, and yes, Angle was, almost across the entire ring. It would have taken 2 seconds to drag him back. Would anyone have really cared or noticed?
Right. Like you beat the guy, you're dragging him so you can hit the move. Like, I'm sorry, but I feel like we've seen that before with top rope moves before. So I didn't see
that. And as far as Angle was, he could have just gone to the other turnbuckle, it looks like.
Oh yeah.
Like he could have just gone, he could have stepped over Angle.
Oh my god, you're right. But why did we never think of that?
But I don't know everything about the hard cameras and stuff like that, so he could have been playing for a certain camera angle. I'll give him that. But just because I was, trying to find footage of this, like Justin, you brought up the Iron Man match, and that was one of the first things that came up when I typed up, because in my mind I had Lesnar versus Angle, and then kind of had to go through some things. But,
oh my gosh, you're right.
Yeah, so
he's too close. Yeah, he's a quarter of the way versus 3/4 of the way.
Right. So
I think
it's interesting
honestly,
to go back.
Now knowing that it's either number one, the camera angle, and they're like, you have to do this from this angle.
Right.
No pun intended. But or it has to be ego. To me, Lesnar seems like an ego guy.
Yeah.
Huge reason why, honestly, I could care less about what goes on now, because I keep hearing he's had the title for like 4 years, and that's a whole different story. But again, like, he just seems like an ego guy to me now at this point. But again, I mean, you're dominating. You can do the move. Like, there's nothing physically he can't do. So I just, I don't know. I mean, I think we could talk about this one forever, but again,
let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm going to go to my number 2, but real quick, I'll say, Matt, you are right. The Iron Man match is way better than the other matches they've had, so that would probably pop up first, even bigger than the WrestleMania match. And Noah's right. You do go to the hard cam. You always go to that side for a finisher. So he was never going to go with that turn.
So I didn't know. So that makes sense then. And I guess maybe Lesnar's like, fuck, I got to do this. And he's like, shit, this commit. Is the literal biggest, 5-star of my life, and he's got to do it. So maybe then you give him more credit for being like, you know what, I literally have to try this for my life, and you know WrestleMania.
What? There's so many layers. Here. There's so many layers to it because you could say, you never know. Like Lesnar could, Kurt Angle could have scooted over. Like you see guys, like he could, not to put blame on anyone else.
Climbing and they're focusing on Lesnar. Maybe Angle's. Okay, good point.
So
all right, I take back whatever I
couple egos, not
Lesnar.
Just a real quick thing, but so there's so many layers to it, but. What was yours, Justin? Let's hear it.
I'm going to go to quick number 2, but number two. So I'm going to set the stage for you. WrestleMania 21, April 2005. John Cena and Batista were on the rise. Batista was rising on Raw. He was clearly going to be the next man up. John Cena was rising on SmackDown. It was clearly a new era. Everybody knew it. Brock Lesnar was gone. He had already left. Mick Foley was gone. The Rock was gone. Triple H. All these guys were winding their careers down. Undertaker, Kane, Big Show. I could go on and on. They needed new blood, and that was John Cena and Batista. And Batista was going to face Triple H in the main event of WrestleMania 21. That was the final match. And he's also the guy who won the Royal Rumble that year. On the SmackDown side, John Cena versus JBL was for the WWE title. That is my number 2, Cena versus JBL. But the backstory here is that Batista won the Royal Rumble. And who did he eliminate to win? John Cena. When it was Batista getting the main event shot, who closed the show over John Cena? It was Batista. They both were in the draft lottery months later at the time when they had the titles. Who was the big pick at the end? It was Batista. But the reason I have John Cena versus JBL is because despite Batista clearly being 1A and Cena being 1B in the company's eyes, Batista ended up getting injured a few too many times, and Cena, always in the underdog role, slowly rose and surpassed Batista on the pecking order. And this is going to be probably the next podcast, but John Cena then went on to... Pretty much. He went on to... main event for the next decade straight, lead the company in everything, every record, every merchandise thing. Hogan, Stone Cold, Cena beat them all. And the company, obviously years ago, we talk about this, which was valued at $1 billion, is now valued at over $7 billion.
Zabadoo!
And you can obviously make a case for a million different reasons why. But leading the charge for the past 14 years has been John Cena.
Sure.
And he's been the man. He's been the top guy. And I mentioned our next podcast, because of this win that started it all, I am putting John Cena on my Mount Rushmore of wrestling.
Okay.
All right. I've got a couple things to say. So if you had to choose 4 wrestlers, Cena would be on there?
Well, I don't want to spoil everything because I think this is a good, but there's 2 guys that I think everybody will put on. I guess I'll say who, but it's Hogan and Stone Cold. If those 2 are not on your top 4, then you clearly don't know anything. So Hogan and Stone Cold.
Okay.
And John Cena, after 14 years, longer than Hogan, longer than Stone Cold, longer than anybody you can name, he was on top. And clearly I just mentioned the business side of it. You can't really argue numbers. So Cena at this point has clearly earned it. Wow. And I would put him in the 3rd spot. And here's where the funny part is the Mount Rushmore. The funny part for me is who does get that 4th spot? Is it The Rock? Okay. Is it Ric Flair? Is it Andre? Is it Vince? Is it Undertaker? Is it Shawn Michaels?
You just leave Abraham Lincoln up there. That's all.
That's
all right,
true
you're
too.
Done.
No, he was a wrestler.
Gobbledygookler.
You got the Vampire Hunter. You leave him up there.
Vampiro.
Abe Lincoln was a wrestler.
Oh, that's crazy.
Of course he was. He was in a zombie movie. But anyway, quick aside, I'd do you one better than Stone Cold. I'd say Hogan and Triple H. But anyway, moving on.
No, not even close.
Moving on.
Hey, Triple H is a good one. I'll stand up for Noah on that one.
I could definitely, I definitely would argue. That's a really good actually podcast.
Okay.
Next one, your Mount Rushmore.
Over Stone Cold.
If we got to pick four all time, yeah, I think it's a really, really good podcast, really good Mount Rushmore. Next question to everybody, hashtag it, Mount Rushmore, WWE wrestlers. Gosh. That's going to be a really good one. Yeah. I'm actually excited about them. But anyway.
Oh, my God.
That's a good one because I remember Cena, like Justin said, only in the fact that I remember when he first came out, he did his raps. He worked his way up. He was a little bit older looking back on things, but he worked his ass off, worked his way up. And I bought into it. I used to have the gold chain, Word Life, the headband.
Yeah, for sure.
I had the Pauly D hair poof, like, what I could do with it. The shirts, the gold chain, all that, the wristbands, headband stuff. And I remember when he first faced Undertaker, I'm like, I love this guy. And like JBL, I never liked JBL. Didn't care for him. Didn't think he was that great. Honestly, didn't understand why he was this main event. I know he did for like a year, but good for Cena to do that. And I guess that's just where I stand. It's more or less knock on JBL, and Cena definitely earning his due on a list here. So,
well, I think it's good that you mentioned age because that's another reason Cena ended up surpassing Batista. Batista's the one who started in his 30s. Cena was in his 20s. So again, if you're the company, who are you going to go with? The guy getting hurt a lot and up there in age, or John Cena, who's younger, I guess, better looking, all these different things. So slowly but surely, Cena became the man. And then, like I said, ran the company pretty much for over a decade now. And he's just slowly now starting to go to Hollywood and doing his own thing. So he deserves it all.
He's the new Rock. Yeah. And I totally get that. And I get that. And he's earned it. And he's done his thing. He's put in his time. And I have no complaints about Cena and whatever happens with him or what he does or what they do with him or what he's earned. So that's good for him.
All right. I think we are at our number ones, if I believe so.
Oh, okay.
All right. Just like that.
Just like that.
Noah, you want to lead us off?
All right. Let's everyone quiet down. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm singing the Hardy Boys theme song here. Not only did SummerSlam 2000 set us up with arguably the greatest TLC match, Edge, Christian, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, Devon, Bubba Dudley, Dudley Boys, Edge and Christian, Hardy Boys. SummerSlam 2000 set us up, but that is not number one on my list. It is going to be the second match from WrestleMania 17. In my opinion, the greatest pay-per-view that I've seen personally, in which every match, honestly, I could watch through every single time. But TLC number 2.
Oh, sure.
Between all three of those aforementioned wrestlers. Again, SummerSlam 2000 set us up. But WrestleMania 17, it topped it in every single way. Not only were the ladders higher, the table falls greater, more tables involved, more wrestlers involved. Each tag team had someone come out now in their defense. Not just like cheering them on and cheering them to get up or whatever, but Rhino came out. He came out with the gore. The Spike Dudley with the Dudley Dog. Lita with the Lita Karana or Hurricane Rana or whatever she called it. But again, like you look back at that match, and I could almost every single fall, every single spot. It was like a moment that I just won't forget.
Yeah, and they took it to the next level. You could see they were a lot more comfortable with what was going on with like the equipment, right, that they're using. Yeah, like
it was just everything was topped. Everything that TLC number 1 had in SummerSlam 2000, which is what I thought of putting number 1 for me, because to me those were the moves that I followed, that I tried to emulate. Again, when we backyard wrestled, like I love the Hardy Boys, I love the tables, the ladders, like what can we do? What can we use? What can we do better? What can we jump off of? What can we use? Not to just wrestle on the ground or wrestle on the grass or the snow. Like, what can we use to our advantage?
No,
and to me, those 3 tag teams just topped it.
Yeah.
And the number one moment for me, honestly, if you were to be like, Noah, this is what wrestling is defined by. This is what you look back on your time when you watched. To me, it's Jeff Hardy hanging from the top rope.
Oh,
and
man.
Edge spearing him off.
Yeah.
And I look back at the My Sacrifice videos that they did.
Sure.
With the moment of when you are with me, and it's like at that moment where they hit it, and that's when Edge spears Jeff Hardy, and he looks up and then looks down, and like
just epic.
I don't know. To me, that I just can't top it. That's just what I always come back to.
Yeah.
And in that moment, again, WrestleMania 17, we watched it over and over on VHS, and it's like I will never forget that moment. I'll never forget that match.
Yeah.
And to me, there was a TLC 3. Again, Jericho and his aforementioned teammate that we will not mention, but great moment in time. But it was to make up for Triple H's injury, so people kind of forget that, and they may not even remember it. But to me, WrestleMania, the top of the top in that moment, besides Rock and Stone Cold, that match stole the show. And honestly, like, I wouldn't redo anything. Like, there's nothing I would change about it.
No, I think it's great. Yeah.
So to me, that's just my number one match, and I don't think I'll ever change that.
No.
It's a good pick.
Yeah, you did great. I don't even have much to add to it. I mean, you nailed it, man. It's a roller coaster ride of emotions, right? Just them putting their bodies on the line like that. And taking it to the next level.
And everyone had a chance to win it. Everyone, you thought the moment. From 3Ds to Devon's finisher off the top of the ladder to like Bubba Ray going with Matt Hardy through a table like 30 feet in there outside of the ring. I mean, just
oh my gosh,
every tag team, every member had their moment. They had their chance to shine. I feel like that one kind of stole the show. So, again. All right. See you guys. I'm going to YouTube it.
All right,
come on. No, we got Matt's pick yet.
All right. Let's go, Moses.
Let's go. So I had to pick one just because he had to be on my list. Is Goldberg and him winning the WCW title against Hogan. Justin helped me with this one a little bit. We were talking about beforehand.
All right, here's the backstory here. All right, this is one of the biggest moments in WCW history.
Let me try the background first because I did look this up, and then you do your hashtag actually. So
right.
what it was this was obviously a record with Goldberg being undefeated, but also Hollywood Hogan was coming back. This was like his 4th time coming back into WCW, and he himself was on a streak of like, what was it, Justin, 70 something? Of him not losing or reign, he was like reigning champion for such a long time.
Yeah, he was on top as always, which he pretty much always.
And which I do want to. We were talking about egos, and I want to touch on this. It's because Goldberg wins, he undefeated, he gets the title. But when you watch the match, it isn't clean. It isn't like in the middle, in the middle of the ring like that, fair and square. The whole thing. This is, is it Karl Malone, the mailman? He like comes out to the like.
What? Oh yeah, Karl Malone was doing it. Dennis Rodman back then.
It was DDP and Karl Malone, the mailman. They come to the ring after Justin. Can you help me with his name? Is it Henning or something like that?
Kurt Hennig.
Thank you, Kurt Hennig is coming. Yes, he's coming to the ring, and then it kind of like stops the match for a little bit, and then all the camera pans to is the mailman giving that. Kurt Hennig the diamond cutter, and then Hulk Hogan's distracted, turns around, gets speared, jackhammer, and then Goldberg wins it. So that's just my little take on it too. Just the way it was, like, or as far as ego goes, like Hogan couldn't lose straight up. It had to be like not dirty, but it still had like something to it. Which just looking back at it, I mean, I was glad Goldberg won, and I got a soft spot for him and a hard spot or whatever, but do you have what was your background going to be for it, Justin? You can drop some knowledge on us now.
This was arguably the biggest moment in WCW history, but it was, again, like 6 months later, kind of like with giving away the results. It also backfired on them. So what happened was at the end of June, at the King of the Ring, Kane won the world title. He held it for 1 day because the next night, Stone Cold beat him right back for the title on Raw. So they ended up doing a huge number. They pretty much gave away, Stone Cold versus Kane and a title switch, Stone Cold beating Kane for the title that he had just won the night before. So it was pretty much like a pay-per-view, and they did a huge number. So WCW, being the not-so-bright people that they are, pretty much hit the panic button on that next week's Thunder and pretty much announced, out of the blue, undefeated Bill Goldberg, hottest star in probably the entire industry, is going to be getting a title match against Hogan. And then they announced it in Goldberg's hometown at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. So I don't know about you, but that smells like pure money. That smells like a record pay-per-view. That smells like weeks and weeks of build. But they gave it a few days. And yes, they filled 40,000 in the Georgia Dome. And yes, they ended up winning the ratings war for that night. But again, this was at a time where WCW could have used any bit of profit they could have to make their money back. And winning the night didn't earn them an extra cent. Now, millions of people buying the pay-per-view and selling out the Georgia Dome 80,000 and having weeks and weeks to promote in Atlanta come to the Georgia Dome instead of 5 days' notice. But again, at the time, it was all about the ratings victory and Bischoff looking Tuesday afternoon at the numbers and saying, we beat Raw, versus, hey, why don't we spend a few weeks and think long-term and get this Goldberg on pay-per-view beating Hogan? But regardless, I agree with your pick. It was probably the biggest moment in WCW history at the time. But again, hindsight looks back on it and says, I don't know. So it was basically a 1 week panic reaction to Raw doing a huge number at the end of June. So I loved it. And yes, like you said, the ego thing, there's always a reason behind it.
Right.
Hogan was in a celebrity feud at the time. So they were actually going to have a tag match at the next pay-per-view with, I think it was Malone or Jay Leno or Rodman or whoever they brought in at the time.
Sure.
So they were doing the tag match. So Hogan didn't really need the title for the tag match. So believe it or not, it was his idea who suggested this.
Oh, okay.
But Hogan, like you said, the ego, the rumor has it, the reason he suggested this is because then he would come back months later and end Goldberg's streak.
Oh, sure. It
didn't end up happening.
Yeah.
But that was his idea at the time. So, again, there's always a reason for it. It's similar to 2002.
Right.
Remember when Brock Lesnar was undefeated and on his warpath to the title, beating The Rock at SummerSlam, in the build-up, he destroyed Hogan with a chair and bloodied him up and rubbed his blood all over his chest. Yep. And this was laid out by Hogan. He suggested this. So, again, his ego and all that. But, again, his idea was he would have this and then come back at Survivor Series 2002 in New York, Madison Square Garden, and end Lesnar's undefeated streak for the title.
Right.
That happened either. People saw right through it. And after they did the destroying with the chair, then they just never went to that. So poor Hogan.
Poor Hogan. But like you could, ego in not always in a bad way, right? But like also it would be a smart business move, right? They seem smart business decisions, and it is a business, and if you're doing it that way, I totally get it.
I get it.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it was something with mentioning of the Lesnar shooting star. Pride comes before the fall. He thought he could do it. And Hogan, again, I'm going to talk about him in a little bit because actually he's my number one coming up. But the thing about it was, he had the track record. He sold out arenas. He did all these things. So saying, well, he shouldn't have been on top. Well, history shows, yes, he should have been on top. Yeah. So it is better for business.
Definitely.
All right, I guess we're ready for my number one.
Here it is.
This match is before any of us were even born. Any hint? Any ideas? Not a clue. January 23rd,
I knew it.
1984.
I was born in 84. But September 84. Go on.
Hogan defeating the Iron Sheik for the WWF Championship. All these things that we just mentioned, everything, all the memories, all the moments, everything, none of that would have happened because that was the birth of Hulkamania, and that is when wrestling became mainstream worldwide, and Hulkamania ran wild on everybody. So For historical value, you do have to go back to where it all started because none of this would have happened without that.
Oh, I feel like we should have had Jason on this podcast. He could have just lit us up with his Hogan impersonations.
I am a real American.
Very cool. No, that's a really good one, Justin. That one came through like as I scrolled through a lot of try to do some research and find some title matches. And well, to be honest, I didn't think of it or read it because it just wasn't what I was looking for at that time. But I can
looking for something fun.
Yeah. Well, the pictures were in black and white, so I just kept scrolling. No.
All right. Well, if you guys have any like quick honorable mentions, any title matches or matches maybe you want to quick add out there quick before we sign out.
Well, you know what? I don't mean. Someone we didn't even mention. Did Randy Orton? Did he make any of anyone's lists?
He was on mine.
Okay.
What?
The triple threat at WrestleMania 30 with
the triple. You're right. That's my bad. Okay, the triple threat. But I'm just trying to think of other people that would have been.
Yeah, singularly.
Yeah. No. What about Shawn Michaels?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. On one of my honorable mentions would be HBK Razor Ramon, the very beginning of a ladder match.
Right,
okay.
WrestleMania 10.
Oh,
that
sure.
was definitely, you have to mention that.
Good one.
Started all ladder match, did things off the ladder.
Good one.
Great feud to begin with, but you take it to a whole nother ladder level, and obviously my list doesn't exist without them. So
sure.
HBK Razor Ramon hit my honorable mention.
Okay, that's a really good one. Justin, do you have an honorable mention?
Yeah, I was just going to say Brock Lesnar versus The Rock at SummerSlam. Again, it did major money, huge promotion, one of the biggest buy rates in history. And it was, again, just kind of the passing of the torch. Rock was leaving. They needed a top star. 2002, that was Brock Lesnar. And then he led us now into the next generation. So that would be an honorable mention.
And then did Chris Jericho make our list other than build-ups? Was he a triple threat too?
See, that's another one. Yeah, I definitely want to give a shout-out to Jericho. But I just couldn't find that single match with him. Triple H, yes. Angle, yes.
I saw one.
Not that it would be a top 5 for me, but again, I definitely want to give a shout out to Jericho, who I was going to say why I mentioned him with Angle and the other man, just to give the shout out to him because they were extremely underrated, underappreciated, and if it weren't for the push that the main guys got, they stole the show almost every night, every pay-per-view.
Well, because I thought Jericho had it. Wasn't there one night where he won both titles?
He unified them.
Yeah.
He unified them.
That was
the
a
unified
big thing,
champion. And that's where I was trying to look back and think. I'm like, the matches weren't necessarily memorable. Yeah, he unified them, but if you don't look them up, you don't remember.
Right. That's a good point. I fell into that trap myself.
But to me, Jericho, we loved him. Walls of Jericho, Y2J, everything.
Lion Salt,
we all liked them, but again, if it doesn't necessarily come to your mind, I just couldn't put them in top 5. But absolutely honorable mention Y2J.
I agree.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned that on Twitter. The night he beat Rock and Stone Cold, the two biggest stars.
Sure.
The 2-in-1 night. Yep, exactly.
That was Vengeance 2001, so that was memorable. Do you have any other ones, guys?
Did the Undertaker did any of his matches make the list?
Good point to there. I looked up Undertaker's and all his memorable matches to me, they weren't for titles.
Yeah, because even Hell in a Cell with him versus Mankind,
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that
was the shame with him, or all the battles with Kane, Stone Cold, all of them were just. Triple H, sorry.
Sure.
Undertaker and Triple H, great feud. Justin, you remember when I said perfect match?
Yes,
and then
except I
didn't rate it number 1. That used to be the joke, it was a perfect match. WrestleMania 17.
Oh, sure.
To me, best pay-per-view ever.
Yeah.
I had Triple H, Undertaker, perfect match, bar none.
Ooh,
then it wasn't ranked even top. It didn't even make my list here because it wasn't for a title, but
yeah. And this is one
amazing.
This is a yes or no question. Could you make an argument for WWE Mount Rushmore Undertaker? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes, Justin. Yes, Noah.
You can make an argument,
Yeah.
But I would bet nobody puts him on. And
Okay.
that's a shame. It's a shame.
It's a shame. No, that's
and I may not put him on, but
I'm
if you did put him on, absolutely.
I'm probably going to put Gold Dust on mine. No, I'm kidding. So,
I do have one more for honorable mentions.
Mm-hmm.
I did have the hardcore title belt with the 24/7 thing that Matt mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But this one, Eddie Guerrero winning the title for the first time.
Yeah, you're reading my mind. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have that written down, but just thinking of it too, I'm like, man, that moment, him holding it like that, like gripped in his forearms, like look at like teary-eyed, like
and that's exactly why, because I look back and I think of Eddie Guerrero. He made wrestling fun again.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't where I watched every week as I used to in high school, but when I randomly did after high school, Eddie Guerrero made wrestling fun again. The whole lie, cheat, steal thing. I mean, it's, great, whatever, but like it was just genuinely like you were happy to see him win. He made you like enjoy wrestling. It was fun. It didn't have to necessarily be about a storyline or technicality. It was just fun to watch.
Yeah.
And then also, I want to say like a guy that well deserved, absolutely earned it after all he put into it to finally get that title. And then the number one thing is going to be Justin. I hope you remember this, but do you remember me telling you that I had a dream about Eddie Guerrero?
No, I don't.
Don't? Where I had a dream. Eddie Guerrero came back.
Oh, yes, I do remember this now. Yes, he came back.
Like jacked, and then he hit the frog splash. And I don't know if I told you about it at the time, but I had the dream of that. And this is when Eddie Guerrero was injured and out.
Okay.
Nobody will remember this. He used to be with the Hardy Boys and Lita. And all of a sudden, Eddie Guerrero was wearing the Hardy Boys armband, and then he got injured, and he was out for months and months and months. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Eddie Guerrero came back, jacked up, like muscular. All of a sudden, was a top name, and became a title contender. And right before he came back and did all that, I had a dream that Eddie Guerrero came back, jacked up, and did the frog splash on someone. Oh, sorry, my cat. And I told Justin about that, and it was like, "What are you talking about?" And then all of a sudden, it literally happened.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, Eddie Guerrero won the title. I'm like, to me, I mean, I just feel like we have to mention Eddie Guerrero. Rest in peace. Like, a shame what happened, but absolutely a guy that deserved it. And to me, when I didn't watch wrestling as much, he was kind of the reason why I would have watched.
Sure.
So I just...
Yeah, that's
to me, and again, Eddie Guerrero was just fun. Like, he was fun to watch. And kind of like one of the guys, like, you feel like if he won the title, wherever he won it or was celebrating, like, you would have met him at the bar, would have celebrated with every fan, and like... And those are the guys you kind of want to cheer for, like Daniel Bryan. Like, he just became one of the guys, and like, how could you not root for him?
Right.
So, I mean, I just have to mention Eddie Guerrero finally winning that title, and to me, that was just a big moment for an honorable mention.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was either going to be that one over Brock Lesnar or the Daniel Bryan match, because both points were kind of the same about the underdog and how fans pretty much demanded the spot happen.
Yep.
Sure.
And just a quick point, Eddie Guerrero did get hurt with the Hardy Boys thing, but he also got in trouble with the law and was fired for those months. And then he was welcomed back in good graces. Again, that's part of his redemption story, because he had a whole lot of issues that he finally beat his demons.
As a guy who's definitely had his demons and redemption, again, I don't know.
No, that's great.
I can relate to Eddie Guerrero, so kudos to him. Rest in peace. But yeah, I had to mention Eddie Guerrero. So.
That's a really good one.
All right. Do you guys have any, Matt, you want to go first with any last plugs, anything to hook you up?
No, yeah. Feel free to hit me up at Twitter, Mr. Matty Moses. YouTube's the same, Instagram's the same, and yeah, that's just where try to promote this stuff out there and check out whatever else I got going on musically and whatnot. So I'll pass the torch to Noah.
Great list. Everyone, I like how we were all different in our list. I actually was afraid that we were going to be kind of similar, but again, great list, great history behind it. I love how we were differentiated. Again, Mr. Matty Moses, Matty Moses. Justin Watry, of course you know that. You're listening to it. You follow him. He's got the history. He's got the takes. I'm a newbie. I don't know what I'm doing. I just got the few years span. But again, that's my list. Hit it back to Justin.
Great
All
stuff.
right, yeah, just to repeat that, I love that our lists were different. You know, we're all fans in this. We all love it. So it's just cool that everyone has their own take. We all have opinions. You know, there's nothing to argue or fight over. You know, we all love it. In the end, we're all here for the same reason.
Yeah.
It will.
Yes. I just want a quick shout out. Absolutely now, next podcast, Mount Rushmore. That's going to be a good one.
Oh, boy, I can hear the fighting already. So, actually.
Yes, well, you said, well, The Rock says,
What?
Son of a... All right.
What?
One last plug. You are listening to the 411 Foresight Wrestling Podcast on the 411 Podcast Network. We are on Apple, we are on Spotify, we are on Google Play, we are on TuneIn, we are on YouTube, and yes, we are even on iTunes. So please rate, review, subscribe, give us some love, and we are going to end things here with Moses and the Hermit, Act 1, Vibin.
Yeah. We vibin'. Hey, you can catch me chillin' at the speakeasy. Matty on the other mic, make it look easy. We ain't here to start trouble or steal your breezy. I saw a breeze by, I think she got fleas. Please believe me, I'm headed to an island now, where they offer me weed and I have to turn it down. I'm the opposite of turn up, but I'm getting down. On my square, you out of shape when I come around. The five catcher, number one chief, rhyme inspector, holding down my sector. You know it's been a pleasure. Give a damn about the heckler at a show. Give him a drink before we toss him out the front door. Now the vibe is back, riding on this loopy track. You call a contact, that's how we bring him back. I should've told y'all the monster's changing back. Bill Bixby chillin' till the world collapse. Yeah. We stay vibing at perfect time, and y'all see us shine and stand up for real. Hey, we got that flow, y'all. We bout to show y'all. This how we do, y'all. Vibing. We stay vibing at perfect time, and y'all see us shine and stand up for real. Hey, we got that flow, y'all. We bout to show y'all. This how we do, y'all. Vibing. Moses on the mic, and you know I keep it vibing. Straight to your brain like too many coke and lime. I've done this for a while, but I always got time in to sit down and vibe for you and rhyme some rhymes and let you know I know how to relax. If you off the wagon, we kick it, you gonna relapse. Skipping on house payments, I'm a swooping like Remax. I can do it all, I'm a man of many hats. A jack of all trades, if you can do it, I done it. I see you bumming, you been walking and I'm running. I rock a red beard, but I'm not one for hunting. Unless your girl's alone, kid, then you see me gunning. For what's yours is mine, you're too kind to share. I can tell you're just a tortoise and I'm the hare. Winning non-stop cause you're ill prepared. With the vibes you be catching, the shit'll leave you scared. We stay vibing at perfect time, and y'all see us shine and stand up for real. Hey, we got that flow, y'all. We bout to show y'all. This how we do, y'all.